Hello, thank you for joining us for Unprecedented Art Response to 2020 Roundtable discussion. This exhibit includes 81 works from almost 400 submissions from across the country. Through these works, we can see that artists found new inspiration and means to depict their fear, frustration, loneliness, anger, loss, and hope. There are photographs, sketchbooks, paintings, videos, and quilts. Together, they represent a collective response to a specific and difficult moment in time. We hope you have a chance to experience these works either in person at View or online at viewarts.org. Thank you to our judges for participating in this extraordinary exhibit. Let me now introduce our judges. We have Stephen Horn, who is an editorial cartoonist, illustrator, and museum exhibit designer, and now is focusing on painting in his studio in Paul Smith's, New York. Next, we have David McDonnell, who is a potter and taught at Syracuse University for 38 years. Now he works in his studio and teaches workshops across the country. And lastly, we have Catherine Tedford, who is the gallery director of the Richard F. Brush Art Gallery at St. Lawrence University. She oversees a digital archive consisting of street art stickers from around the world. Let's get the discussion started with a few questions. How would you describe the range of works that were submitted to the show and the subject matter? Did any general themes emerge?
I can start. I made a list of, as I was going through the jurying, and so I'll list off some of the things I wrote down in terms of subject. The January 6th insurrection, California fires, anti-Asian hate crimes, gun violence, anti-lockdown protests, BLM protests, mental health issues, climate change, capitalism, overconsumption were a few. It shows the range of subjects that came in.
Well, I was quite impressed by the diversity of the subjects and themes that people submitted. 2020 was a landmark year for a number of reasons, and I think in many instances, all of the people that submitted work touched some of those concerns.
Yeah, even when the concerns were about their craft. I think that there was a significant percentage of the almost 400 submissions that were focused on issues that might have just grown out of time in their studio. And I thought that that was also a valid way to deal with the weight of COVID and isolation, just as the invitation to the exhibit specified or asked.
Yeah,
So
in that regard, Stephen, I think I echo that a lot of the works were about process, and I think because people had time, it was reflected in the work.
Great. What were the criteria that you used to make your selection for the show?
All right, I'm gonna go first again.
Sure.
I took notes. So I needed to do this as I was jurying because I wanted to have a system in my own mind of how to do the jurying. So I wrote the careful use of materials and craftsmanship, the concept, the depth of engagement with the show's goals, the level of personal investment in the work, and the descriptions helped me personally. I like that, and I also included the level of risk, and I don't always put the level of risk in, but there was something that if an artist took a chance on something, I wanted to kind of recognize that.
Anybody else have any thoughts?
Well, I mean, the question is a fairly open-ended one. I mean, there are a variety of criteria that you can use to judge the quality of a work of art. In this particular case, the parameters were were quite obvious in terms of it relating to something that we all have experienced. And so one of my primary concerns was does the piece speak to something that I would consider to be part of the experience of 2020? And being a craftsperson myself, I was always interested in how the individual used their material to express their ideas, and most importantly, how they used their technique in an unusual or inventive way. And so, you know, one of the things that I was really impressed by in terms of this exhibition and looking at all of these pieces is just the level of expertise and artistry that was displayed in an overwhelming majority of the submissions.
Yeah, I think I want to point out one problem for this exhibit that has started a couple of years ago. It had nothing to do with COVID or the events of 2020. It's that we had to look at three-dimensional works of art and two-dimensional works of art on a screen. And that's not entirely fair to all the 400 people who submitted work. So please, everybody, understand right from the start, we knew we were dealing with a little bit of your story, not your entire story. I couldn't look at, as a painter, I couldn't look at brushstrokes. And Kathy and David could not look at the three-dimensional qualities, or on some of the pieces where there were details that were fine. One storyboard piece was intriguing to me as an ex-cartoonist, but there was no way for me to really follow that. Now, that's not a fault of anybody other than the reality of this mask-wearing year. So we tried to understand your work, and if we missed it, we apologize. But I know the other jurors and I have talked about in the jurying process, really trying to understand what you created. And that was in 400, almost 400 pieces. That was a big task. So we read some things well, and if we miss, don't let that slow you down. Keep making your art.
Thank you.
Yeah, I concur with Steve. I think that what he mentioned isn't only necessarily part of this past year, but it's part of the whole digital presentation of works of art, which in many instances, for logistical reasons, things have to be reduced to a flat digital image in order to be practical for an institution like a museum or a gallery to be able to see the work, especially in a situation such as this show, where you have hundreds of pieces being submitted from all across the country. There's no way that any institution could handle that many objects of art. And so in some ways, the digital technology has made things better for artists, or more accessible for artists, but in other ways, it has also limited the ability of an artist to truly represent himself or herself in a juried situation. I remember when the Everson Museum in Syracuse, which used to hold a national ceramic exhibition every couple of years, and when they changed from actual pieces being shipped in to slides, 35 millimeter slides, which some of you may not even know what those are, but basically they're just flat images. And one of the the things that I noticed was that not necessarily the quality of the show changed, but the nature of the show changed. And I remember when I was teaching and talking to graduates, they were saying that sometimes they found themselves making work that was good, easy to photograph.
Right.
Because that was how some juror or some gallery owner was going to see their work. And unfortunately, that's the nature of the beast nowadays.
Right.
So how did you balance between content and technique in your judging? Which was more important in your evaluation?
Well, for me, content is prime. I remember an undergraduate professor of mine who always used to, his mantra was technique is not content. In other words, you can develop technique, you can be very facile with materials, but unless you're saying something, then the work of art becomes just a technical exercise. And so one of the things that I was primarily concerned about, and especially since in many instances, some of the materials and techniques that of the work that was submitted, I'm not particularly familiar with myself. And so in many instances, I was most concerned about how I reacted to the work of art in terms of how it spoke to me in relationship to the theme.
Yeah, I think it was difficult to be able to judge technique because, as we just finished talking about, we were looking at a flat photograph of three-dimensional objects or two-dimensional objects that still had a character to them that we couldn't really see. So I think, and with the theme of the show, we were all perhaps more aware of statements of content. What I usually do in any kind of situation is try to see if the technique or approach that the artist has tried ties to what I think the artist is saying. And that's what's successful or not successful. Mm-hmm. At that point, I'll start focusing on what I think the technique that was tried, whether or not it was successful or not, but really it's whether or not the statement stands out to me, and that draws me in to look closely.
I would agree. I mean, I think I was able to see the show in person last Friday, and the first thing I noticed was the materiality of everything and the texture and the, you know, several fabric pieces and that storyboard that you were talking about earlier. You know, I could read the detail, and that made a big difference. I encourage people to go and see the show too in person. But yeah, content for sure was most important. I think the way we were jurying in this format, I agree with Stephen and David that it kind of forefronted content via a digital format.
So what surprised you about the submissions?
For me, that was so many of the works in the show were so raw, like the statements that people were making or the sentiments that they were expressing that were so honest and so authentic. And I guess we've been so removed from one another and from emotion, you know, and materiality this past whatever 18 months, you know, that it was that raw emotion really came through to me in reviewing the works.
Well, for me, I think the thing that struck me the most was the fact that there weren't as many highly political things as I would have expected. And those things that were somewhat political were, well, I'm thinking about when I was going through college and I, during the 60s, during the civil rights movement, and also during the anti-war movement, and some of the art that was made during that time was really quite aggressive in terms of stating a point. And I really found a lot of the work that was expressing some kind of political idea to be somewhat, well, some people would say tasteful, other people would say somewhat subdued. I think the other thing that struck me about the submissions, or some of them at least, was I'm retired and I spend a lot of time alone in my studio. So during the whole pandemic thing, I really didn't feel a sense of isolation until I started looking at some of the work in the show, and how that isolation was so strongly expressed in some of the work.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing for those of us of a certain generation, and we won't pull out birth certificates here, but the unprecedented nature of this past year isn't so unprecedented to some of us, because we've been through the anti-war movement and the civil rights movement, and so the problems of race this past year are sadly reminiscent of things we've lived through before. And same thing with health issues. I had polio, and I live in a town that's history is all about curing tuberculosis patients. So I think what's unprecedented is we've had about 50 to 70 years of relative peace. And it's not peace, and it's not the country that we want, but it's not daily confrontation with pandemics, and it's not the wars that our grandfathers and fathers and we had to deal with. So I was looking at the submissions from that point of view. And like David, I was interested in the tone of the protest. And I too remember trying to figure out whether I was going to go to jail or not back when I was a student. So these things are interesting. They're sort of tangential to the making of art. Again, you come down to whatever your statement is, and it can be totally non-political or apolitical. Still, how did you use materials to be able to make that statement? And I think what we've been saying is we all were looking for that as a door into the works that were submitted. With 400, almost 400 submissions, there really was a huge range of attempts and successes.
Did this exhibit adequately represent the year 2020 in your mind?
It was huge, and there were lots of things that happened. I think that the fact that we're able to talk about an art exhibit at this point, after 14 months or so of what has not been fun for lots of us, even those of us who were used to isolation, would have liked to have seen a few more of our friends. So did it represent the year? It was part of the year. It makes perfect sense to me. And I like the idea that the Art Center invited these responses. So, because this is all feedback for us. And this is going to continue. This is not something that's finished. This experiment, folks out there, doesn't end because this exhibit is on a wall. You're going to be making statements next year about this past year.
Yeah, well, I would agree, but I think it's difficult and maybe somewhat I don't know what the term would be, futile to try and have an expectation that an exhibition of a finite number of objects could represent a year that many of us who experienced it will probably be talking about it for quite a while. I think that the View should be congratulated in terms of taking on a project like this, not knowing what's going to happen as a result of sending out all of these invitations for artists to participate. I think the show does touch on many of the issues that were at the forefront during the year 2020. And I would agree with Stephen in the sense that, you know, you should have another show in which people look back at 2020, maybe 5 years from now, and see what their perceptions of this kind of signature and pivotal period of time would be.
Mhm.
You could call it 2020 hindsight.
Yeah.
I thought that the View call for entries was really well crafted, very articulate, very strong. I commend View for putting on this show. I agree. And I don't have more to add to that, I guess.
How did the View feel about it?
I think well, even since Friday, we had the reception, we just had such amazing feedback. I mean, Kathy, when we were there, we just were talking about how different it is seeing all this work in person. It just was, I don't know, inspirational just to see everything. And at the same time, kind of sad because you're responding to a lot of the things that happened in 2020, but we just have such amazing feedback so far. So we're really excited about the show and getting, you know, the word out that it's happening and get people to take a look and kind of see the artist's different responses to everything. So
Yeah, one of the observations that I just now thought of is that when I look at when I try to remember all of the submissions, you know, I can't, I think most of the submissions were of an attitude that 2020 was a year that was difficult to survive. And I was just curious if any of the other jurors found any of the submissions that were happy about 2020.
Hmm.
I don't know that I'd say happy, but when I was reviewing images this morning, I was struck by a number that aimed at a different sensibility than Panic. There was, in fact, in our award-winning group, there is one that we agreed had a beauty to it, and that the search was, I think, there towards some sort of beauty rather than panic. So that's an optimism that I think we were all happy to see. And I think that there were numbers of optimistic pieces that caught our eye. I was happy that everything wasn't the same note, that there were numbers of notes.
There were works that also celebrated nature and the fact that people had to, you know, didn't have to, but, you know, chose to be outside and reflect on nature, their interaction with nature, I thought came through in the exhibition.
Well, I thought in some instances where as you say, people were reflecting on nature, and maybe I'm just a cynic or a pessimist, but I think isolation was one of the things that encouraged a lot of people to slow down and look around them, sort of to smell the roses, and I think that, if anything, was a positive aspect of 2020, that it caused many of us to slow down and also to take to be thankful for the things that we do have, one of which is life, because over 500,000 people lost that blessing of life, during 2020 and continuing so.
In the US.
Yeah, in the US alone.
Well, thank you for all your comments. Why don't we move on to talking about some of the award winners? So let me pull up my screen. Oops, there we go. Let me go back to the beginning here. Sorry about that. All right, so this is the first place piece.
This piece jumped out to me immediately as my first place pick. It's just going through the images. And I love the way the two figures are facing away from each other. I love that composition like that. They're connected, but they're looking apart. I just love this piece.
Yeah, one of the things I like about it is the elegance of it, that it is simple and straightforward, but has a kind of elegance about it that reminded me, in some ways, struck a responsive chord to me, like sometimes when I look at a beautifully made pot, vase, or something like that, something that's simple and straightforward and uncomplicated.
Yeah, one of the things, going back to your question about technique and content, you don't really want somebody to focus on your technique. You want the content to come through so clearly that they don't stop and think about how well the blacks work in this composition, how well the white against black, with the, we've been talking about what an elegant composition it is. That grabs you right from the start. You don't have to work at that. And then once that's pulled you in, you can notice small things in the child's face. For me, I then remembered that the photographer who took this had to arrange it and had to have the child wearing a black sweater so that the photography technique could work. And those are all parts of the craft of making art. And they're all nice to think about, but by now you're into your third or fourth minute of thinking about this piece. And that's a success right there. If you've gone that deep into looking at a piece, the artist has worked. He or she has pulled you in. So this one, I think we all agreed, did that. And I'm really happy to look at it right now. So.
Okay, let's move on to second place.
This was a piece that I love seeing in person versus the digital version. It's small, it's intimate, it packs a powerful punch nonetheless.
I like this piece as well, although on a number of different levels, one of which is that the images obviously strike a responsive chord for me and are quite evocative of what was going on during 2020. But one of the things that one of my undergraduate professors used to say, especially when I was involved in making political statements in my art, and that was, a piece of art of that nature is successful when someone looks at it and doesn't know what the issue is, but still is attracted to it. And this is really, I felt, a very, very strong drawing, painting, or whatever. And even if you took those images out, I think it would still hold together very well.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. I think that I liked it immediately in that first. I mean, I look at works and in the first couple of seconds, I'm hoping to be grabbed and pulled in to look more closely. And this one did that. And once the content of the images were apparent to me, or was apparent to me, I liked it that much more. So it's that combination of things. I think, David, your associate is right, that it's got to work graphically or as a piece of art. And then when it hits you with the real statement that the artist is making, it just becomes bigger and deeper and stronger. So this one did it for all of us. I think we all agreed on it.
All right. Here's the third place piece.
Again, fantastic in person.
Yeah, I was attracted to this piece because to me, it really captures the craziness, the chaoticness of the year 2020 in terms of being moved and pulled and pushed and shoved in so many different directions. It really captures for me the kind of emotive nature of some of the things that were happening during the year 2020.
I remember back in about 1970 being in the giant field house at Cornell as we were trying to decide whether or not the whole world should go on strike or how we should respond as a bunch of 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds. But and finally, towards the end of speeches that went on forever because we weren't all that good at making speeches, the Dan Berrigan of the Berrigan Brothers came out on stage, and we were ready for the final statement of a pre-revolutionary thought. And basically and I think Phil, his brother, was in hiding at the time. I might have those two reversed. But anyway, his point was, we can't have a revolution without dancing. So I looked at this, and that's the Berrigan Brothers came to mind immediately. So there's that.
All right. Here are two honorable mentions that were selected.
Well, one of the things I do when I look at a work of art is I try to figure out what the artist's decisions were. And so with these and with everything that we looked at, I try to put myself in an artist's shoes and say, okay, I'm going to put this flower background behind me for what reason, or I'm going to have the woman dressed in this dress, and I think these pieces provoke that in me, trying to figure out what those decisions were that the artist made.
I thought the piece on the left, Quarantine Story Time, to me kind of in a clever way expressed some of the isolation that all of us felt during 2020, and was kind of presented in a very almost humorous and clinical way, but I think quite effective in terms of some of the mind changes we had to go through in order to survive the year. And in many instances, it's things that we didn't even think about being important until they were taken away from us.
As an ex-editorial cartoonist, I sort of looked at these and others of the same genre of making statements, and I think these two do, as these are captionless cartoons, and that I didn't need to read anything to understand what the artist was going for on the left or on the right, neither the Victorian outlaw or quarantine story time.
Mhm.
And that strikes me as a success when that happens. Then I'm drawn in and try to parse the elements of it. And I think both of the artists here built complex statements that kept me engaged for time. It would be great to see them both in person, and I hope to both see the submissions and pay attention to see if these artists' names come up in my life again, where I can see them again. So no, I think these were both successful.
All right, and then these three it was selected for judge's choice.
I think the one, Relic of a Pandemic, 6 feet, is a very good example of how something suffers visually when it's presented as a digital image. We were able to see it on a much larger scale than is presented here, but this is a prime example of how something might seem to be inconsequential or minimal, but then when I read the description and learned a few other things about it, like that's toilet paper, toilet tissue, then that brings, but this would have been obvious if I had seen the object in real life. And I found the kind of tongue-in-cheek nature of the commentary to be quite effective.
I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but again, these pieces really, in real life, the materiality comes through. Like I learned so much more seeing COVID blues in person. The detail, and it's not three-dimensional, it's three-dimensional, but it's shallow dimensional and just lovely. The artist's book on a pedestal there was equally very powerful.
Yeah, it is hard to judge things that have dimension without that ability to walk around them or to look from the side. So it's to the credit of these three artists that they were able to get their story across to us, even though we couldn't do that. So I think that means that they also understood composition that would work well and other elements that would draw our line. But yeah, we all need to be able to see these in real life, and we will, won't we? Yep.
All right. Do we have any last comments or anything? All right.
No, I was just,
Okay.
and I think Catherine had mentioned this during one of our conversations, that I was really quite amazed at the amount of work submitted that was in the field of textiles, quilts, and things like that, which you can't always tell if you're looking at a digital image. That you can't always tell that something is a very intricate quilt, and I'm particularly cognizant of that because my wife is a quilter, and I understand the amount of energy and time that goes into making something that might seem somewhat simple and straightforward, but really labor intensive.
That one quilt that you showed, Heather, had a huge amount of detail, a lot of threading detail that you couldn't see in the digital image. It was very satisfying, really well done.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think my main takeaway is that we three jurors tried our best to understand the work that you submitted. And if we missed,
Mm.
it has nothing to do with the quality of your work, because we had some limitations in how we could appreciate your work. But I think we who make art will just tell you that this is just one moment, one snapshot into your life's work. Stay with it. It's the real reward is not getting an award from a jury or an exhibit. It's standing back and look at something you just finished and you're feeling really good about it. So there's our sales pitch too.
Mhm. Yeah.
Thank you, Heather, for everything. And please thank everyone at View too.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Thank you all for talking with us today, and we appreciate your insights on both the exhibit and the works on display. Just a reminder to everyone that all the works will be on display from our jurors and Unprecedented. They're also available online. We encourage, as discussed, that these works are so incredible that you're going to want to see them in person. But for some reason, if you can't, you can still go to our website to see all the information. And just thank you again to everyone, and have a great day.